Here we go again.
Oh, no, not again.
You've seen it before, haven't you?
Dom, how long have we been doing this?
Once more unto the breach, dear friends.
Again and again and again until we're both dead.
Hello and welcome to You've Seen It Before, movie reviews and connections in mind. Midway is the latest film from director Roland Emmerich and stars Ed Skrein, Woody Harrelson, Dennis Quaid, among a whole bunch of others. And this film is essentially a retelling of the Battle of Midway, as well as some of the events leading up to that battle in June of 1942, and how it was essentially one of the turning points of World War II for the United States against Japan. Now, this video will contain some spoilers of Midway, as well as certain other films, and there'll be a full list of description below. I warn you only because, I mean, you can learn about this. It's history, but just to be fair, I will be doing my spoiler-free thoughts on Midway prior to my spoiler-filled analysis, so be warned, once I give another spoiler warning later on, then you'll know that there will be spoilers as well. But for right now, let's give some spoiler-free thoughts on Midway. Is it a good film? Is it worth seeing in theaters? I would say absolutely. This is definitely a cinematic type movie, as many war films tend to be. This is benefited by the fact that this is a aircraft-centric war film, so you get a lot of good angles of aircraft dive bombing these Japanese carriers. There's a lot of good character work in here, although I will say, unlike certain other war films where you tend to do like a deep dive into only a couple people, then everyone else is just kind of a backdrop to those one or two main characters. This one doesn't necessarily do that. It tries to do more of a down-to-earth retelling of the events of these historical events leading up to the Battle of Midway, and tried to highlight the main players as much as possible, but not really focusing too much on the same one or two people that other war films do. It kind of does more of an overall thing. If there were going to be a main character, I would say it would be Ed Skrein's character, who he's portraying a real person, Dick Best, who was a dive bomber during the battle and prior to that. But other than that, there's really the main characters are anyone the film tends to focus on, and I think that that's a fairly refreshing view of things. And for a Roland Emmerich film, who Roland Emmerich and his production partner Dean Devlin, I believe, was not part of this film, but Roland Emmerich has a reputation of doing a lot of over-the-top sort of films, such as Godzilla 98, The Day After Tomorrow, 2012. These are like these big, epic disaster films, and this feels a little bit more reserved, I feel, for a Roland Emmerich film. I was sort of surprised going into this. It doesn't really go over the top with these action set pieces, and it doesn't really go the other way. Like I said, it doesn't really get all cheesy and try to do like the one-liners or like the tacky inspirational lines that you hear from like stereotypical war films, such as like, we gotta do this, guys. I mean, we do have that in this film, but it really isn't the main focus of this film, and it doesn't really impact the tone of this film. I would say this film is there are some exaggerations. I'll get into that in a couple specific examples in my spoiler-filled thoughts. Again, this is history. Go read a history book if you. But for the sake of not giving away too many plot details, I will say there are a couple exaggerations, or at least some that I saw. I would say this is a relatively faithful retelling of the events leading up to the Battle of Midway and the battle itself. It's not a terribly long film, so it does kind of cut things short and doesn't linger on things that I personally would have liked to linger on, but I would say it doesn't really shy away from showing even another thing that this film does well, I feel, is it doesn't shy away from showing the Japanese side of things, and while it doesn't necessarily portray them as like blameless in anything, it does tend to humanize them. And I feel like that is an important thing for a war film to do, because in war there are two sides and both sides tend to demonize the other, but in the end we're all just humans battling each other, and we have everyone has the same sorts of emotions and reservations as the next person, regardless of what side we're on in a war. So I thought that it probably didn't do the best job of it, but it did do a job of it, which it was more that could be said of a whole bunch of other war films. So if I was going to sum this up, I would say if you go into this knowing that this is going to be not a humongous over-the-top action film, and it's not going to be a deep character dive into any one or two people, it's just going to be a faithful retelling with some great effects. I thought the effects were pretty good. So with all this in mind, I would say definitely go check this out. And because depending on when I get this video up, we'll be celebrating Veterans Day here in the US. So this is a good way to honor our veterans, especially our World War II veterans, who are getting fewer and fewer every day. So if you know World War II veteran, thank them for their service, and also watch this movie, I guess. I would say, if I was going to give this a letter grade, I would say this is a solid B+. Again, because it's not one of the other extremes for a war film, I feel like this is going to end up becoming forgotten, and I think that's a shame, because this is a pretty good retelling of the events. So those are my spoiler-free thoughts of the film. Now let's get into some spoiler-filled analysis of the film. There's certain plot developments and character arcs that may seem familiar to you and where you may have seen them before. Again, with a historical film, and like I said, this is a fairly accurate retelling of the events, it's kind of hard to point to character tropes or whatever that you see through certain things, because as far as I can tell, it's mostly real life. I mean, some things they may have exaggerated or amalgamated or made up for TV or movie, I should say. Like Nick Jonas's character, I'm not entirely certain if that was based on a real person. Who knows? I don't know. I would have to do further research on that. But there are certainly war film tropes that you could kind of point to for this. Like if you're looking for if you think it's unusual that a war film that is meant to be entertainment does pretty much a straight retelling of events rather than do great exaggeration to one or the other, I would say this is not a unique phenomenon. I would point, in fact, to Tora as an example of a film that was released as entertainment, but also as a pretty accurate retelling of the events of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Speaking of Pearl Harbor, I would say this film covers the Doolittle raid, which was a event which Colonel Jimmy Doolittle, who led a flight of, I believe it was 16 B-25 bombers who were never meant to go on an aircraft carrier. They launched a carrier-based bomber attack against Japan in the aftermath of Pearl Harbor. I believe it was March or April of 1942, so relatively quick after the events of the attack on Pearl Harbor. And this film, if you've never heard of the Doolittle raid before, you don't know the history books, this event will seem familiar because it was also portrayed in the film version of Pearl Harbor, the Michael Bay film. However, I think this is a little more accurate in its just basic retelling. It's not weighed down by the extra baggage of Ben Affleck, their drama going on, weighing down the historical event and the importance of it. However, I said there was one specific instance of exaggeration that I noted in this film, and that is in the film Midway, the Doolittle raid. The guys are taking off, and the carrier, the Hornet, is pitching up and down violently, and they're in the middle of a storm essentially, and there's spray of the water. In fact, Doolittle, while he's taking off, the bow of the Hornet dips, and then you get a big spray of water off the bow, and then the plane flies through it. And there's like these bombers barely had enough lift to get them off to begin with. So there's obviously a chance that they won't crash, but of course, Doolittle's plane managed to catch lift and take off. It's supposed to harken back to a very famous image of the Doolittle raid. This image, in fact, however, if you notice this image as well as an image taken of the same instant of Doolittle taking off from the Hornet, you'll notice it does not, it's kind of hard to tell in a black and white photo, but it doesn't look particularly stormy to me. So I feel like that's one specific instance of exaggeration on their part. So, but there may have been others, I don't know, but that was just one bone of contention that I had as far as a very obvious exaggeration. Also, just some kind of fun little asides in this. David Hewlett, who I know from Stargate Atlantis. I love him as Dr. McKay on that show. He's done other work. I thought it was kind of cool. He was in Rise of the Planet of the Apes. But he's also in Midway portraying Admiral Husband Kimmel, who was the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet at the time of the Pearl Harbor attack. And then he was relieved of command after that and retired very shortly after. But it was just a random part, and he just pops up, and I was just like, I did not know he was in this movie at all. He's barely in the movie. I mean, again, he's in one scene. So it was just kind of a, oh, hey, hi, how are you? Cool. So that was a fun little moment. Also, in this film, they also insert the fact that this is dramatized in the Netflix documentary Five Came Back, I believe. During World War II, we had a whole bunch of Hollywood types, especially directors who were too old to enlist and fight properly, but they served in the fact that they were given, they were enlisted in the armed forces as movie directors and filming documentaries and training films for the armed forces during World War II. One of them being John Ford, who was known for having a close relationship with John Wayne. He had a relationship with John Wayne, who they made a whole bunch of westerns together. And so when John Ford was in the armed forces as a movie director, he was on the Midway Atoll during the attack and filming the attack. And he actually got wounded during the attack. And all the footage that he shot during this event, before, during, and after, became the documentary The Battle of Midway, which is only about a little under 20 minutes, and it actually won the Academy Award for Best Documentary in 1943. So that's some awesome bit of detail that they threw in there. There's also just one bone of contention that I had about this film, also from a historical perspective, is they put the Doolittle raid in there, and they show the aftermath of Jimmy Doolittle, who is played by Aaron Eckhart, I believe, in this film, and the impact of the Chinese people who were hiding Doolittle and his men from the Japanese army, and they were hunting them. And any Chinese citizen who was even suspected of helping these men were brutally tortured and killed. I think in the movie, at the end, it says about 250,000 Chinese people were killed for helping Jimmy Doolittle and his, I believe it was 80 men escape the Japanese. So that's just incredible. But it's an important story, and I feel like it just felt a little tacked on. It could have been dealt with a little bit more gracefully. Maybe it was tacked on because maybe because there were definitely some Chinese investors in the production of this film, so I'm sure they wanted to add that in there, and it's definitely an important story to tell. But it felt a little forced into the story, and it didn't give the story of these people the due that I felt like the story would require. And because it just kind of gets shoved to the side a little bit in this film, I feel like that was a bit of a disservice to that. So that was my only major quibble with this film. But other than that, I would say this is definitely a good war film, and I'll probably buy it when it comes out on Blu-ray. But like I said, because it's not an extreme in one way or the other, it's probably going to end up forgotten, and I think that's a shame. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on Midway. What did you guys think of the film? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Do you agree with any of the points I made in my analysis? Did I miss something? I probably missed something. Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate whatever audience I can get. Be sure to look for my next review, which will be for Ford v Ferrari with Matt Damon and Christian Bale. That'll be coming out soon. And again, if you're celebrating Veterans Day, or if you celebrate Veterans Day, even if it's not Veterans Day, please tell a veteran that you know that you thank you for their service to this country. Again, thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you next time. But don't forget, there's nothing new under the sun. And yes, you have seen it before.